Lou Cozolino, welcome to the Science of Psychotherapy podcast. How are you?
I'm good, Matt. Thank you for having me.
Great to see you, good friend. What are you doing over there in the United States?
Staying home, sitting in the sun. I'm doing a lot of work on my cars, which it's been putting off for a long time. So I'm just trying to take advantage of the forced retirement that I've been going through. And I've got my 13-year-old son doing online school now. So it's
Right.
pretty sweet to have him around all day and be able to have little breaks and have lunch and all of that. So that's the upside.
It is an opportunity for families to be together, for better or worse.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh yes, but you've given everybody this wonderful gift of something to do in your new book.
Mm-hmm.
Good heavens, when you stop doing this, it's hard to keep up. But the pocket guide to the neuroscience. Now, let's just start off with that one, because I mean, there's a million things we could talk about that about everything. But you've done this; it's just come out, and ought to put it out. We'll have something in the magazine about it really soon. It's just pre-order at the moment, but. What was this? Where did this come from? The motivation and the attitude to this one.
Well, I think it was born, I think, of my oppositionalism, which really is not adaptive at all. But what I'm seeing is more and more, sort of how-to therapy books coming out, and those are the ones that people seem to flock to. And I haven't given up yet on the notion of expanding the knowledge base in our field in neuroscience so that, psychotherapists can really understand and utilize and apply the tens of thousands of research studies that have been done over the last 30 years or so that are applicable to the type of work we do. So this is sort of my last version, or my latest version of waving the flag and saying, understand this basic stuff, understand this research, and become sort of a smart consumer of neuroscience and social neuroscience research going forward.
Now, this is in a very readable presentation. I mean, it's not intimidating at all. I'm guessing that was on purpose to reach a broad audience of therapists.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the real purpose for me was to put it in as simple and straightforward language as possible, and whenever possible, tie it to the clinical situation.
Yeah, well, this is what I like. It's not just a set of ingredients. It's actual, which is always very useful, but there's lots of textbooks to do that. And this is perhaps the trouble that's been going on. The difficulty is that we get, as you say, 1,000 fabulous papers, but how do they integrate into our engagement with the human experience as a clinician? And this is what I think this book does. And, we'll have to be nice to you because it's worthy. You're worth it. Your writing is just so beautiful and comfortable and engaging. And you seem to just kid glove me through this detailed stuff. Was that an intention, or was that? I think that's just you, actually.
I think at this point, I can sort of nerd out on the science, and I was just at a neuroplasticity conference a month ago, and I can really there's sort of like a state of mind where I can take a deep dive into the particular neuroanatomy and neurochemistry of very specific processes. But I think, having taught at a graduate level, training therapists for 30, I don't even know how many years now, I realize that if I have another state of mind of communicating with my students, and very few of them care at all about the stuff that I nerd out about, but they're very interested in being able to, they're fascinated by the science. And I just don't mean neuroscience, but I mean how neuroscience and biology fit together, and brain development and attachment and evolution, and all of these things that together they create this sort of scientific consilience that gives us, it's almost like going from a picture of something to actually having a three-dimensional model of it, where you can walk around and understand the history of the individual, the deep history of the species, what's going on inside, what manifests behaviorally, and how we are social beings interwoven and interconnected with each other. So I think at the beginning, when people, when they come to my lectures, they might get a little high or dizzy at first because it's a different, and I get this way with Robert Sapolsky. I have a huge man crush on him. So whenever I hear him present, I sort of just, my heart goes pitter patter, and I kind of just start fantasizing like, God, I would love to be locked away with this guy for a week and just listen to him talk. Right.
Well, you preempted me. I was waiting for a pause to say that actually my dream lecture couple would be you and Robert Sapolsky.
Oh, well, thank you.
So I put you on the podium with him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, Richard, shall we dive into some aspects of the book? Obviously, it's way too broad to cover everything, but are there some aspects that you'd like to sort of have a look at?
Yeah, well, you've done it in two parts. I think it's interesting. There's sort of a part that's possibly a bit technical. Please explain it to us in a moment. And then the second part, which is more clinical. And then there's a set of appendices, which actually interest me more than the body of the book. But that's only because there's such new work there. But what's this? These two parts and then the appendices. Can you give us a breakdown of how you approached that first and second attack of the book?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first cluster of chapters are really, from what I see, sort of like the nuts and bolts of what we need to know about the social brain, brain development. I'm really attachment. It really is sort of the core of interpersonal neurobiology. Like, what is sort of what's the admission ticket to be able to read any of the work that that we do in the Norton series and elsewhere, so where you can have a basic understanding of sort of like a broad foundation. And then some of the things that I really wanted to go into, it's sort of a little bit later in that first part, is this idea I have about executive functioning that I've been teaching now for a couple of years, and I'm finding it also incredibly helpful in my work doing corporate consulting, working with executives and higher level managers, and so I really wanted to get that information out on the table, and that's what the first cluster is about. The first set of chapters. The second set of chapters for me was really taking the theory and bringing it into how does it help me in the session. Knowing the neuroscience I know, and how does it impact what I do moment to moment in assessment and connection and hypothesis generating, case conceptualization, and things like that. And finally, the last section that you like the most, Richard, is sort of the more nerdy pieces that I really couldn't fit them in so much into the flow of book, but it's on evolutionary theory, genetics, epigenetics. And then I figured it would be really good to have a glossary, like key terms for folks in neuroscience, and also to kind of know who the stars have been, over the last couple of 100 years that have led to significant technical and theoretical advancements of the fields of, biology and more than that, sociobiology, evolution, other fields.
Yeah, and I love that 20 key figures in the science is the chapter, and of course I flipped through as I was flipping through and saw my great heroine Marion Diamond. I was very excited to see that we think the same there, and so many of the people. And this frame, there's some wonderful case studies. Really, and I'm wondering if rather than sort of going through theoretical stuff, although that'll emerge, is there a case study in the book, or just one that you've got on mind that can just give us a bit of a walkthrough so that our listeners can get that feeling of just how you approach a client and integrate these bits of information? Is that okay? So throw that at you. Is that all right?
No, the person that comes to mind, I mean, it's an interesting challenge for me with case studies because, I for confidentiality and the like, they're not really a person. Yeah. And it's a lot easier for me to go for someone I remember. But the case in there in Michael is sort of a conglomeration of 3 or 4 different cases. So I just think about the key elements was, was someone who came actually was in a training program, doing a master's degree to become a therapist. And like so many therapists, they have all of this unresolved trauma that they're, in a sense, they're trying to parlay their defenses into a career, but they try to circumvent doing the work they need to do, but eventually it catches up with them. And this fellow Michael had found himself sitting across some clients and having panic attacks just in the face-to-face, setting. He was an excellent student. He did fine in classes. He was a little bit socially unusual, socially odd, maybe. You might call him spectrumy, if that's a word you guys use down there. But it's, he was passable, a little quirky, but passable, but started having panic attacks when he sat in front of people. And of course, like anyone else who has a panic attack, they usually don't know at first where it's from. And it turned out that, such an interesting thing about him was that he grew up in isolation just with his mother and father in the Middle East. His father worked for he was a petroleum engineer or something like that. And his mother had schizophrenia. And so the mother would leave him every morning. The father would leave every morning to go to work, and the mom would gather up all of his toys and everything that he would play with and take them into her room and lock herself in her room all day. And he would be left alone. And so left alone with his own fears and anxieties and fantasies and everything else. And she would, if he would make a toy, she would discover it. She would also take it away. So one of the things he did was he found there were bricks lining the back path, or the path in his backyard in this rented home somewhere in the Middle East with the walls around it and all of that. And there was a guard standing, at the front gate. But other than that, it was just he and his mother in this compound. And he took a brick, he would turn it over. He drew with a magic marker a face on it, would wrap a towel around it, and he would sit all day and hold it and rock it and talk to it. Right. And then a few minutes before he knew it was time for his mother to come out and, join the world and put his toys back where she found them, he would put that away, turn it upside down, put it in the walk. Right. So I'm telling you that story simply to say, here's someone who grew up in a very bad situation, psychopathy and psychopathology in the mother. The father was probably spectrumy as well, really didn't have a relationship with him. But what happened to him was his mother would, because he was really her only company, was that she would sit across from him and just talk to him in illogical, thought-disordered language that would fill him with anxiety and fear. And he had successfully repressed those feelings and those memories until he found himself sitting across from clients. And of course, the universe sent him client after client who were women about the age of his mother who had similar defenses and all of this. And so, that in that case, I think we really got to, I used it in a sense to demonstrate the different systems of memory, how memory can be delayed, how these things can become activated later on, and how how our brains develop in ways that adapt to a particular situation or a particular context in our childhood. But, hopefully if we grow up in a bad situation, we grow up into a better situation. The problem is our brain doesn't forget, where we were. And it's like, I think it was Salvador Minuchin who said, we grow up in a shell, and that shell follows us in life. I think that might be in this book. And that we don't know that shell is there. So one of the many ways to think about therapy is sort of the exploration of the architecture of our implicit memory systems, making those increasingly more conscious so that our cortical facilities can integrate those into our sense of self and into our understanding of ourselves, into our narrative, and also create downward inhibition from the cortex to lower brain regions to help us modulate the affective activation that occurs.
Right. Yeah.
So I mean, just kind of as a.
Oh no, it's brilliant, and it's beautiful. And I just jotted down a few things that I was thinking, what will really help someone working with this case, and you've mentioned some memory and some of those things. And I'm thinking understanding subcortical systems, how automatic things become engaged, and the executive brain area that you talk about there, the interrelationship and the way in which the executive brain relates with subcortical areas. And of course, these salience networks, default mode networks, all these wonderful things. And then those other things you talk about, which you mentioned there, schizophrenia, you need to understand. Or if you have an understanding of schizophrenia, if you have an understanding of attachment, you have an understanding of complex trauma and the effects they have, you're going to be able to work with this person in just a, when we think in complex systems, you're just going to have more elements from which to something successful and effective to emerge. And that's why I love not only that you write the information, but you write the information so it's personable and become,
wonderful. So we're in a situation at the moment, I'm just thinking back to some of the earlier topics to do with the social brain, and we're in a situation pretty much around the world where we're becoming more and more socially isolated. Or Richard, as you would say, it's more correctly, physically isolated, but we're calling it social isolation. And Lou, I just wanted to know from you, what is that doing on a mass scale? When we are social beings, we have a social brain, we love to get together, and here we are in a situation where we're forced to stay apart.
Yeah, we're kind of messing with the natural order a bit in some way. What are your thoughts there? Because of course your term, the social synapse, that space between people, does it survive at 6 to 8 feet? These sorts of thoughts have been running through my head too.
I mean, I think because the world is becoming more and more digital. I think that we're getting a little bit of a taste of what the deprivation of proximity and face-to-face contact, being able to touch and smell and feel each other. I think that we're seeing, in other words, for teenagers and younger people now, I don't know if it's the same way in Australia, but in the United States, the levels of anxiety and depression and suicide all reaching historic highs. And this is not due to the coronavirus. It's basically, I think it correlates with, it doesn't correlate with any of the usual factors like economic problems, unemployment, all of those things. The only thing it seems to correlate with is the total penetration of the internet. So I think that we're already getting a glimpse of the effects on human beings when they spend less time interacting and more, sort of face to face, and more time sort of texting or not being really involved with each other. So I mean, the model. One of the things that I don't think I did it in this book, but certainly in the Neuroscience of Human Relationships and some of my other books, and I really talk about the conservation and evolution of structures and strategies. And we all know that, one of the structures that have been most strongly conserved is the amygdala. So we have this very primitive reptilian stage executive system at the core of our brains that is really out of sync in a lot of ways with the other executive systems and other things that we do. But it also goes for strategies. What evolution does is it conserves strategies that are successful. So you see that when you have a bunch of inorganic molecules, those that are more connective tend to be more plentiful in the universe, for example. And when you put neurons near each other, they spontaneously start to communicate. And I think there's this notion of neurons connecting, stimulating each other, needing to be connected in order to survive. So I always say, neurons are like mafia guys. They have to be connected. They have to be made neurons in order to survive. And I think that we take that for granted, but with the digitization of our relationships and the further separation that we're seeing now in, with social distancing, or whatever you want to call it, I think that we tend to underestimate the communication across the social synapse in that conservation of strategies that evolution used inside of us, right? It used it to create superorganisms called families and groups and tribes and all. And so I think that because we don't see it, we take it for granted, but I think we experience the effects of it. We tend not to attribute it properly,
Right.
But there must be 100,000 studies in social psychology that prove in one way or another that the way we think other people see us, or the way we interact with other people, affect our cognition, our emotion, our perceptions, our biases, our generosity. And then in psychoneuroimmunology, those same effects on physical health, longevity, immunological functioning, on and on and on. And so I'd say we're going to be seeing the results of this quarantining, I think, more and more. There may be somewhat of a counter effect for those of us who are quarantining with loved ones.
Right.
Right. We might actually see a deepening of connection and a reestablishing of some deeper bonds there. But I do worry for people that are alone. This is a really bad time to be living alone and being prevented from going to church or to synagogue, or to go to the store, or to hang out at the gas station, or whatever you do in your world to stay connected to people.
Mm-hmm. Yes, a friend of mine in a retirement village, and what they do is they have a communal dining room, and so they have lunches and dinners, and of course that's all been cancelled at this point. The food is brought to them. Everything's comfortable. But yes, that's so we're ringing on a regular basis. But I was thinking this thing you're saying, this cooperative systems. Joe Ledoux makes a big point of that, just as a sort of talking about it as a fundamental nature of human being. In in his book, The 4 Billion Years of Everything. That fundamentally systems that cooperated tended to survive, and systems that were conflicted tended not to. And so what I'm seeing is that we're getting, again, both sides of the story, because I'm noticing that a lot of now stuff going on that was sort of me just telling, or somebody telling, look what I'm doing, that there's a little bit more of, look what I'm doing, what are you doing? So there may be some positive aspects that we always hope there are from things, but the word that worries me, that's been put into our consciousness in this frame, orienting us, is distance. You must distance yourself from other people, and I think some people will take that as a temporary thing, but it just, as a linguist, that's and some NLP people might see the relationships that creates another. I must stay away. It's a problematic.
Yeah. So I think with us, and I understand what Lou was saying about the digitization, and us even now talking over Zoom. It's not quite the same as if we were all in the room together. But those elderly people who are possibly alone, they're not savvy with, digital tools. They're probably not connecting with others in this sort of virtual face-to-face. And they really are isolated in every sort of way. And being the most vulnerable part of society as well, when we're talking about coronavirus. It is a huge concern, isn't it, as to their mental well-being?
Yeah. Well, I wrote another book. One of my books was on healthy aging, called Timeless.
Oh,
and
yes, lovely book.
Of the science in that book is the type of thing I was discussing, is that staying connected through attachment, continuing to contribute to your family or to your society are the main things that correlate with health and longevity.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's that piece of it. And, think about the people who depend on going to volunteer at the hospital, or my mom, who's in her late 80s, she has 2 or 3 doctor's appointments a week. That's really her job now. She just goes from a doctor to doctor's office, and it really is her kind of social world. Plus, there are always these cute younger men who drive her. They have these volunteers that drive her to her appointments. And so every week, she, in the past, she's had stories about, this guy or that guy, and they, should they go out on a date? And, he wants to go dancing, and he's so funny, all of this stuff. So it's like a big part of her, her world now is cut off. All she has is, fortunately, she lives with my aunt, so they can at least, complain to each other, and they spend all day watching old black and white movies, So it's, I'm glad they have each other, but I know that her life has really narrowed. Plus her vision isn't that good, so she can't read. There are a lot of things like that make people feel more and more isolated.
And here's some of the things that the nature of the pocketbook is all about. If just having an understanding, even a fairly rudimentary understanding of attachment issues, so that you can differentiate some of the elements, not just see everyone as just this blob, or they're having this blob aspect. And then also, as you're saying there, eyesight. I mean, wander off. There's some great books. I'm just thinking of 2 or 3 in my bookshelf that just gave us an understanding of what happens with sight and with eyesight, and how that affects your perceptions, what happens when it goes. Some of Ramachandran's The Phantom Limbs, where there's lots of directions and places that we can find the fascination of what happens in the brain and how it works. But then this return where you go, that helps me make better decisions, make better steps in my therapeutic approaches.
Yeah. And I think too, for listeners, perhaps that, I don't know what level of background your listeners have, probably all different levels.
Yeah.
But when I tend to talk about, I use the term neuroscience because that's sort of the hub of the wheel of the things that I study. But you really can't understand neuroscience without biology, and you can't understand biology without evolution, and you can't really understand evolution without culture. And, it just goes into, so when I talk about neuroscience, you probably see in the book, it's the neuroscience is probably 15 or 20% of the book, because it's a sort of a unifying principle, but really everything's connected to everything else. And so even more broadly than saying like a neuroscientist perspective on psychotherapy, it really is bringing in what I hope to be the hard sciences into our field, in more generally. And I think for my dissatisfaction with psychology as a field, and one of my professors said it decades ago to me. He said, psychology it's not quite a science because it's like a boxing ring. People enter the ring with a new theory, but no one ever gets knocked out because there's no real data to support what you're saying or to reject what you're saying.
Right.
So it sort of becomes this cult of personality, and people keep pushing forward these constructs. And the thing that I really love about neuroscience and the other sciences is that you can put our constructs to the test.
Yeah.
And vice versa. You can also test, like I think one of the key validations for neuroplasticity and attachment in my mind is Rogerian therapy, right? Mm-hmm. Because you see that what Rogers figured out in the absence of understanding anything about the brain really was that he figured out the optimal conditioning for growth and learning, right?
Yeah.
Positive social and encouraging supportive connection. Bingo. That's how we evolved to learn.
And the neuroscience has helped us understand how those things produce neuroplasticity. And so it's just, to me, the metaphor I always use is every piece of information extends my diving board a little bit further or gives me another one that I can springboard off into more of what is exciting. But I do know that in our profession we have a tendency to say, this is the information that defines the process. You can stop now.
Yeah,
And that's one of the big problems.
And along these lines too, you make a point in the book that you say that there is no neuropsychotherapy, which we agree with. That there's nothing that you could define as neuropsychotherapy, which is an actual therapeutic process based on neuroscience. Rather, it's about being informed by the neuroscience to have good practice. Do you want to expand on that?
No, I think that I agree with you. You know, I hear people telling me that they're a neuropsychotherapist. And so I said, what do you mean? And what they say, they describe whatever it is, you know, whether it's they do DBT or CBT or whatever letters they want to call themselves, right? And then they use the word amygdala, and that makes them a neuropsycho. And I say, well, no, you do DBT and you know the word amygdala and you might know the word cortisol, and so they've got a half a dozen words, but they can't really talk about it beyond just saying those words.
Right.
I think the important thing is for people to realize, you know, there isn't yet another training program with another set of letters that you can go over the weekend and get, and then you're a neuropsychotherapist. You have to be trained as a therapist, and then learning about the brain and other you know, affiliated sciences just make your diving board longer.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And you might, I mean, there might be those that do choose to specialize in a very particular aspect of neuroscience or of biology. And those specialists they aren't able to function in a broad way. I mean, I always remember my mother complaining about when she went for her to have her knee looked at because of whatever's going on. And the doctor would say, now, where's my knee? And she would say, I'm sorry, there's a lot more of me, dear. You know, which my mom was. But it is that thing, and I worry that people think that they can learn the neuroscience and function only from a neuroscientific framework, and that is a therapy. And this is where the mistake has come.
Yeah, and it's not just neuropsychotherapy. You know, if people are selling that as a certification or something. But I supervise therapists all over the world, and what I usually get to is that they had a couple of mediocre years in some program where they took courses on the DSM and a few other things, and then they get certified in EMDR or one of the other forms or one of the other alphabet therapies, and then what they're told is that now they're ready to treat people with borderline pathology or complex PTSD or dissociation or multiple personality. And they, you know, when they get in touch with me, it's usually like, well, I've had 2 patients suicide. I'm about to suicide. What the hell went wrong? And, you know, I have to basically start from the beginning and explain, and it's not their fault. They've just been sold a bill of goods. People are trying to make money off of them, and they're being told that they're competent, but then it's their neck that's out there. And they're treating complex cases as private practitioners in communities where they have no hospital backup and no supervision.
Yeah, I think
I don't know how if it's different in Australia, but that's, you know, in the States, that's the way it is now. It's like the Wild West in treatment, and it's scary as hell.
Yeah, we get that. But I was just thinking of a positive case to give an example of where the knowledge is really valuable and clinical. My daughter was overseas and found that she had a growth on the brain. It was a tumor. It was operable. Everything was fine. But there were 2 things that were really important in the process. One was that when she described to me things that were going on, I could hone in on my neuroscience, and I could have a deep understanding of what was going on in the specific areas of the brain. But the other one was she would tell me what the doctor, the specialist, the neuropsychologist and the neurosurgeon told her. And the first thing she would say, is that reliable, Dad? And I'd go, yeah, well, that seems to fit in with what I know. And she said, but what does it mean? And I would then utilize that knowledge and then be the therapist that then gave her a human experience. You are going to feel like this, and your husband may respond this way, and you're going to have these sensations. And so there's nothing unuseful about knowledge, but we just don't get carried away with what does Scott Miller call it, the neurobabble. But I think he's unkind, and perhaps but it's that form.
If he's running into the same people I am, he's right.
Yeah, right. That's yes, yeah, and that's where the point is very importantly put. So what you need, I know, if you could write a pocket guide, so that those people with cargo pants who are just doing the wrong thing, and segueing badly back to the book, but. That's the point. That's the point of these books. And going back to your other ones, the Neuroscience of Psychotherapy, the edition 1, 2, and 3, which is just fantastic. The Neuroscience of Relationships, the Neuroscience of Educational Processes, which you and I had long conversations about. Wonderful, wonderful processes to grasp. Now, but as you say, there's more. But the little pocket of development that you've been given sort of credence in is this neuroscience focus, but that's more of a marketing thing than an expression of the breadth of your knowledge. That's what I think is important to point out.
Mm. Now, Lou, this podcast will be coming out around about the same time as the book is being released. We're recording this a little ahead of time. Can you let us know when the book will be published?
Well, before the world went into a lockdown, I was told that it was going to be available in May, sometime early May. But probably you would have to keep an eye on that and see. I think Guildford, is it Guildford or Wiley that distributes our books in Australia. So they'll maybe they'll have it on their website and the actual date. But everything.
Yeah, so I think
dates don't mean these days.
Yeah, the best thing's to get in and do a pre-order, I think, and establish it, and get your thing, and it'll come. So we'll probably bring this out. We won't fix it, and there's no need nowadays to fix it to release day. Pre-orders is a fabulous way to get yourself, and then you just get this wonderful present arriving one day, which is fantastic.
All right, great. Well, we'll point everyone to those websites where they can pre-order, and they can get their hands on this new wonderful book. Louis Cozolino, thank you so much for joining us here on the Science of Psychotherapy podcast. It's been a pleasure.
Yes,
same here. Thank you both.
Totally without food or beer. We'll have to make up for that at another time.
Yeah, this might be a first for us.
Yeah, it's just such a joy to have you as a colleague and as a friend, and contributing so much to the Science of Psychotherapy. Thanks a lot, Lou, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you, guys.